afternoon, good evening, wherever you at in the world, right? Let me tell y'all something. After a long day of work, eat you some cucumber with just a little bit of salt. Very refreshing. Peel the skin off to prevent gas. Anyway, how y'all doing? It is Tuesday, September 20th, 2022. And yeah, I want to get into some shit about the slave trade, okay? We're going to get into this because, I'm tired of the bullshit, right? What bullshit, might you ask? Well, the bullshit coming from the descendants of the slave traders and the slave owners, right? I'll start with saying this. History is written by the victors, right? History is written by the victors. And unfortunately, the victors of the slave trade story wrote their history, wrote their own, from their own perspective, from their own point of view. Everyone, right, is the hero of their own story. What do I mean by that? I mean that there really are there's individuals out there who do evil shit, right? They do evil shit, but they think that they're doing it for a good cause. Or they think that the evil they're committing is a means to an end, right? And they think at the end of the day, they are the ones who are the moral ones. They're the ambivalent ones. And, sometimes you have to take a few heads off, right? To bring about peace or to, gather resources, all this type of shit. Because you are the hero to your own story. If you go into another country, right, rape and pillage and bring back resources to your country to make your country better, they're going to look at you like heroes. All right? Everybody is a hero of their own story. Right? And of course, in order to make themselves appear to be the great heroes of their story, they need a villain, right? They need a villain. So let's say, for instance, you got Aztecs and you got Mayans, right? And you have tribes of Aztecs and Mayans. They might beef every now and then. They might war and things like that. And, they're very primitive in the way they live, in the tools they have and all this other shit. Their bows and arrows, very primitive compared to the settlers that came to South America and Central America and Mexico. And when these people show up, they might see these tribes warring amongst each other or having a little bit of beef. But guess what? It's all in balance of what's going on, right? In their native land, in their indigenous land. Because you might have a group of ants from this anthill beef with another group of ants from that anthill. But at the end of the day, everything that surrounds those anthills, the nature, all the other, the flora and the fauna, they stay balanced and intact. And then you have these termites that come through, never been there before, and they see these two groups of ants warring, and they say, you know what? We're going to take advantage of this. And when we write the stories of how we accomplished conquering this land, we're going to say things like, oh, well, they were eating each other. They were, sacrificing, children to the sun and all this type of shit. And yeah, we're just going to say that to make us look like the heroes of the story. We came through and we ended all the evil sacrifice. We ended all of the cannibalism, all that type of shit. Yeah, because, you know, we came through with our technology. We showed them a better way. We showed them the better way. And so they're going to skew their story to make themselves look good, right? Even though, you know, yeah, they couldn't hide the fact that they had slaves, right? When they came over here. We can't hide that. But we have to make it appear as though it wasn't that bad. We weren't the only ones, right? You know, the African tribes, African kings and all that. Well, they sold them to us. When we showed up to their shores, they were bow tied in a cage for us. And we just took them, and that's how it was. But is that the reality? You know, there's all this talk. And what made me want to talk about this was ABL, right? And Jim Poole did a story on their channel about how Don Lemon was talking to some chick, Hillary or something like that. She's from Britain, talking about how, you know, do you think that now that the royals should give up some reparations? And she's like, oh yeah, there should be reparations because we was the first to abolish slavery, and then when we was trying to abolish slavery, we lost 2,000 people, and then the African kings was doing this, that, and the third. You know, all that. Here's the reality. There may have been African kings that sold their people into slavery, and there may not have been. You know why? It's not really a fact, because there's only an account of that from one side, right? And throughout African history, other motherfuckers came through and destroyed records of all kind of shit. Destroyed historical records, defaced temples, you know, just basically just destroyed a lot of shit. So how are we, I'm supposed to believe the European settler, who is, when it's incumbent upon them to make themselves look as good as possible in the light of slavery, because they can't really hide the fact, well, we did have slavery, so we have to polish it up. We have to make it appear as though we weren't the real culprits here. But here's one thing we do know. Here's a fact. This is scientific fact. The oldest skull, right, archaeologically speaking, the oldest skull found in the Americas were that of a Negroid. You understand what I'm saying? Negroid skulls. This is a fact, not Mongoloid, because that's what, you know, it appears the Native Americans, the indigenous people of the Americas were, you know, Mongoloid, right? You know, the red skin, the, you know, the hook nose. That's what it appears all the Native Americans were throughout the Americas. But that's not true either, because we know that there are black tribes, right? There were black indigenous tribes in the Americas before the Europeans showed up, right? They did not bring millions of people to America on slave ships. With the way they traveled back then, there would have to be thousands of ships over the course of those couple hundred years. Even over a span of a couple hundred years, they could not have brought millions of slaves to this country, right? And there are also thousands of slave ships unaccounted for that are missing, right? Because just because a ship is a couple hundred years old doesn't mean that it just disappears and deteriorates and And you know what I'm saying? Like, there would be some evidence in the oceans and all that type of shit. Yes, you might not find some of them, but if these ships successfully brought slaves to this country in the numbers that they said they did, then you would see all these ships, right? They can't bring slaves over here and sink in the middle of the ocean and disappear at the same time, right? It just can't happen like that. Because if you tried to bring millions of slaves over here and your boat is sinking in a point of the ocean where it can't be found, it can't be discovered or recovered, then you wouldn't have been able to bring the damn slaves over here anyway. The fact of the matter is, African kings could not have sold all these people, millions of people into slavery, because there were not millions of people brought from Africa for the slave trade to America. It just didn't happen like that. It just didn't. So that's number one. Number two, I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but this is something that I learned years ago when I was going to college, and I took this history class, and this professor had done all this research and all this other shit. Anyway, excuse me, you can look this up as well. The first group of slaves that came from Africa, the first few, swaths of slaves that came from Africa were indentured servants. They didn't come over here as slaves. Well, what does that matter? Well, if they came over here as indentured servants, that means that that the African kings had an agreement with the Europeans to share in the spoils of what they found in this land, and they would send labor. They would equip the Europeans with labor to help do shit, right? They were indentured servants. They left Africa as indentured servants, and they did not become slaves until they got here. Because how were the African kings going to know that they were turned from indentured servants to slaves? TikTok? An email? No. So this is what happened. Africans came over here as indentured servants, and then they were forced into slavery when they got here. And this happened for a while until it was caught on. But by then it was already too late, right? Certain things have happened. But they're not going to tell you all that. They're going to say, well, the African kings, they just sold their people into slavery and provided cages of slaves for us in the numbers of millions over 200 years. And we brought them over here. No. That's the narrative they want to spin for you, so that when you do bring up reparations, they can say, well, you got to go back to the beginning of the supply chain. I mean, it's hilarious. It's hilarious. But this is all these people need to push this narrative that reparations aren't deserved, that reparations aren't possible. Even though white slave owners received reparations for slavery ending. Yes, white plantation owners got reparations when slavery was abolished because they lost all their free labor, right? And they had to adjust and adapt. But guess what? You would think that they could pull themselves up by their bootstraps. But no, they were given reparations. Black slaves were not given reparations because we're expected to be handed nothing and to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. And if we are handed something, we're lazy, all this type of shit. Even though the people that receive the most handouts in this country are white people. That's just real shit. And the Jays. The Jays receive a lot of free shit. But no one talks about the Jays being on welfare and getting handouts. It's all about the black folks. You know what I'm saying? Black folks can't get handouts. Black folks can't expect to be recompensed for the years of slavery. No. There's always a reason. Oh, well, the taxpayer's going to have to pay it. That's going to come out your pocket. No. That's not how it works. There are institutions, right? Private, financial, and corporate institutions that exist today. And they exist today as they do, as wealthy as they are, because of slavery. There are a number of companies that are worth billions and trillions of dollars put together that benefited from slavery. You don't go, why would you get reparations from the taxpayer when many of the taxpayers are descendants of slaves? They gonna pay themselves? No. You get it from the corporations. But they don't want to talk about that either. ABL don't want to talk about that. Tim Pool don't want to talk about that. And they love when these people like that Hillary woman that was talking to Don Lemon. Oh, well, 2000 blah, blah, blah. Yeah, you know what? Great Britain might have been one of the first nations to abolish slavery, but does that really absolve them of the slavery? And this is my thing. If the African kings were so involved in the slavery shit, so instrumental and pivotal in that, then if there's any wealth to be had as a result of that from the descendants or something from those African kings, then guess what? They should pay reparations as well. But you have to prove it, right? It can be proven here in the United States who would owe reparations if that were ever to become something that was forced. It can be proven. You can trace it back to Europe, right? Can they really trace it back to Africa, right? Can they actually find historical records from Africans? Now, I'm not talking about from the Europeans saying what the Africans did. I'm talking about Africans actually saying, like, African kings. Are there records of that? If there are, and if you can find it, and we can authenticate that, right? If we can authenticate historical records that show that African kings actually committed or were involved in this to that degree, then guess what? If there's any wealth to be had from these African nations that were involved in the form of corporations and all that other type of shit, then they should pay reparations as well. Don't matter if they black, but it has to be proven. It has to be proven. They have to prove it. Oh, well, they slavery. African kings sold them slavery too. Where's the historical proof? I have yet to see it. I have yet to see it. And again, I'm not talking about from the European perspective, from European historical records. Fuck that. Don't want to say it, don't want to hear it. African historical records. Because they can't even prove that they brought millions of slaves to the United States. No, but you can prove that there were black people here before the Europeans showed up in South America, Central America, and North America. You can name some tribes: the Seminoles, Blackfoot, Black Crow, to name a few, from here in the United States. I know people I know black people, American black people, who they can trace their ancestry back to tribes right here. And I'm not talking about on DNA.com or Ancestry.com. I'm talking about historical records as well. Books and photo albums and writings, right? But for some reason, they can't trace nothing back to Africa. I have ancestry in I have Native American ancestry. But you know what everybody has? Except for maybe a few European people in a few European countries. Everyone can ultimately trace their ancestry back to Africa. Everybody. Everybody in the world. Even those who have Neanderthal blood, right? Because while the Neanderthals were wiped out by the Cro-Magnon men, you know, there was some crossbreeding and all that type of shit. But at the end of the day, everybody descends from Africa. That's just a reality of shit. Except for actually a group that might not have been are the Aboriginals of Australia and New Zealand. They may have not come from Africa. They might have their own separate line. But at the end of the day, black people were here before the Europeans showed up. Before Europeans even knew there was an America. Especially in the Caribbean. Oh yeah. All up and through the Caribbean. The Taínos and all that other shit. Black people were here first. Before the Europeans. Maybe not the Mongoloid, but eventually, even the Mongoloids descend from Africa. You know, it's just the first group of Africans that traveled to this part of the world evolved into the Mongoloids. And then they continue to spread out to Asia and all that type of shit. That's why Asians, Hawaiians, the Aboriginals. The Aboriginals are kind of like a mix of the Mongoloid and the Negroid, kind of. Like, they're like a hybrid or something like that. But the bottom line is, black people here in the millions, or not, maybe not the millions, because they didn't have that high population back then, but they were here before Africans. Before the Europeans. Now, I'm not saying that no Africans were brought over here in slave ships, but not nearly as many as they say. And not as many as would make sense to the number of slaves that were here. Right? See, many people think that all the Native Americans rejected the idea of slavery and fought to the bitter end, and many tribes were wiped out. No. Many tribes were enslaved. You know what I'm saying? And some tribes fought to not become slaves, and they end up dying off. And some did. And some were successful and then end up getting their little treaties, right? Where they had to be pushed off into some reservation, right? But the idea of reparations is so, it's so rejected out of hand. But in reality, that's what's owed. That's what was agreed to. But they don't want to hear that. They want to point to bullshit. They want to point to African kings. They want to point. They don't want to have any accountability. They feel like their accountability is erased because, we were the first country to abolish slavery. America was one of the first countries to abolish slavery. Okay, and even when you abolished the slavery, you still didn't do right by those individuals that were freed due to the abolishment. You didn't. You sent them off. You gave reparations to the slave owners, and then you sent the slaves on their way. Many were forced into sharecropping. Many were forced to wander into the north with no advantages, but hey, grab them bootstraps and pull yourself up, right? So tired of this bullshit. Ben Shapiro too, man. I want to do a video responding to some of the bullshit he said. He was talking to somebody. He was, doing one of his debates, and somebody mentioned something about the black condition, and he's like, oh, well, it's not about race, it's about culture. Why is there so many, why do you commit the most crime? Why this, why that? Why is there, why is the graduation rate so low? Why is this, that, and third happening? These are very easy questions to answer. These are very easy questions to answer, especially when the government created the conditions for black people to be in that space. The conditions were created. The conditions were created, right? And we were set into these conditions, into these areas, under these conditions. And they said, let's see how they do with scarce resources. That's why they call it the projects. It was a project to see how fucked up can black people be as a community if we put them in these neighborhoods and gave them barely gave them resources, don't give the school resources, right? Create a crime bill, start snatching everybody up, use the 14th Amendment. What was it, 13th? The 13th Amendment to create a different type of slave trade in the prison industrial complex. Let's create the conditions for black people to fail, right? Conditions that Martin Luther King died trying to reverse, right? The reason he wanted to end segregation is so that we can get the same resources white people were getting. He died for that. He died for that because when they ended segregation, it didn't help, right? All it did was ensure that instead of black people being in control of these institutions due to segregation, now white folks are in charge of these institutions, and they don't give a fuck about your black ass as much as they give a fuck about their white ass and their white children and their white families. And so when Martin Luther King said, I just integrated my people into a burning building, that's what he was talking about. Because they weren't going to give us resources when we had our own shit. They weren't going to give us school supplies. They weren't going to give us good books. They weren't going to give us access to good health care, fresh running water, all these things, right? And why should the government give it? Because, right? Because when we try to do our own thing, right, and try to create our own community where our own municipalities, where we were in charge and we were running the shit, what did they do? Oh, they didn't like that. They'll run into your town, they'll burn it down, they'll burn down your churches, they'll burn down your schools, right? They'll burn down your churches, your schools, they'll burn down your institutions, they'll burn down your hospitals, they'll burn down your movie theaters, all because you were thriving without their asses. No one wants to talk about that, though. When they talk about bootstraps, they don't want to talk about that. They think that that's irrelevant. They think that that has no bearing on the conditions of black folks today. And it just exposes their stupidity. Ben Shapiro is an idiot. Or he's intellectually dishonest. Maybe both. Either way, it's easier to answer your stupid ass questions. You would think they would come up with something new. Now, I'm not going to say black people, we shouldn't get it together. No, of course, black people need to get it together. Because we need to stop focusing on this divisive race bullshit. I know it. You guys know it. We know who the real enemy is. But shit like this with the Don Lemon and the old girl and then ABL and all these people putting it out there is just a way to further create division, right? Why do you think Tim Pool's always talking about civil war? He's always pushing this civil war narrative. Because he doesn't want a revolution either. Right? And I'm bringing this to you guys today because it's important. It's important to know the truth. Because if you don't have any type of understanding or knowledge about history, if you don't understand history and know, especially your own history and your people's history, and you just go by what your people's enemies said about your people, you're gonna be lost. It's important to learn from the past. It's important to understand and have common sense as well. So that's why I'm bringing it, because somebody needs to. But at the end of the day, we know that these conditions were created. The condition black people are in, this culture that we have created, that everyone feels is around violence and flashiness and hoeing around and being ratchet and all this type of shit. We're partly responsible for that as black people, but we're not solely responsible for that. These things are perpetuated by the mainstream media, by the entertainment industry, right? Dating back as far as I don't know how far. All these, listen, a perfect example, right? Watch Straight Outta Compton. Watch Straight Outta Compton, right? What happened in Straight Outta Compton? They brought about the gangster rap culture, the gangster rap era. And yes, Eazy-E, Dr. Dre, Ice Cube. They ushered it in. They helped usher it in. But what they were rapping about was what they knew growing up in the hood, right? They were just telling stories. And then the white guy in Interscope, they wanted it to be more destructive. And they flashed that money. And guess what? Black people by nature are into flashy shit. It's just how we're wired in general. And they fell into that trap. And then guess what? They helped push that shit. They helped perpetuate it. They helped proliferate gangster rap music. And without that proliferation, I really, now I'm not the type of person to blame music for shit, but you have to look at it. You have to look at the chain of events, right? You spread that message of gangster rap, right? It inspires people in different areas, in different parts of the country to be a part of that. That's why do you think there's Bloods and Crips all over the place? NWA helped usher that in, but it wasn't just NWA, right? So we have to understand. We have to understand the reality of shit, because there are people out there that'll be very comfortable just putting all that on just Easy and them. Very comfortable with that, but that's not the reality. It's not just them. So, you know, it is what it is, man. But see what y'all talking about real quick. It's Filthy Luger. I want nothing from these robber demons. I heard that, Marcy T. Marcy said October 21st, 2017. In truth, Africans began coming to America thousands of years before Columbus. and evidence of their presence. Yeah, I know. Exactly, Marcy T. And only can you get every color of the rainbow with both black parents. Exactly. Society as a whole isn't as black and white as they say. It's pretty gray in the middle overall. Exactly. Whether it's in the past, present, or the future. Life in prison, WV was good. Had to drop by and give you a brother some love. That's what's up, man. Life in prison, WV. Keep pushing positivity. No doubt, man. And exactly. There's their side, or there's this side, that side, and then the truth is somewhere in the middle. Truth is somewhere in the middle. And when it came out that many of the first groups of of slaves came over as indentured servants, like the Irish, right? Irish came over as indentured servants. They stayed indentured servants when they got here. They stayed indentured servants when they got here. Were their conditions great? No. But they weren't slaves. Well, that's how it was supposed to be for the Africans too that came over. What was it? Being was good. Nicolette Moore says, I don't want reparations either. It's not about, what I want is to be left the hell alone. That's what I want. I don't even necessarily want reparations for slavery. I want reparations for every human being in this country that has been subjugated by this government, right? Forced to pay taxes, right? Or wealth stolen, and people being in prison for bullshit, like a gram of weed, all type of shit. Reparations isn't just for slavery. I feel like the government owes every extortion victim reparations. That's what I believe. And for us to be left alone and all that type of shit. But that's just me. Anyway, I'm gonna holler at y'all later. Get up in this house and relax. Just make sure y'all like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment. Tell me what y'all think. And yeah, we'll go from there, man. And I'll holler at y'all later. Let's keep marching forward toward freedom. Peace.